Welcome, friend, to this gentle journey through the shadowed halls of ancient Alexandria, where tonight we'll uncover the forgotten stories of the most powerful sisters in history. As you settle into comfort, let your mind drift back over 2,000 years to a world of golden palaces and deadly ambition. I'm grateful you're here with me as we explore the untold rivalries that shaped an empire. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of the great palace, as Princess Arsinoe IV stirred from her silk-draped bed. At 16, she possessed the sharp intelligence that marked all daughters of the Ptolemy bloodline. But unlike her famous sister Cleopatra VII, Arsinoe's name would be whispered only in the darkest corners of history. The year was 48 BCE, and the scent of jasmine from the palace gardens could not mask the underlying tension that permeated every corridor of the royal residence. Arsinoe's bare feet touched the cool stone as she moved toward the window overlooking the harbour. Alexandria's lighthouse stood sentinel in the distance, its beacon a symbol of Ptolemaic power that had endured for 3 centuries. Yet this morning, like so many others, brought news that threatened to topple everything her ancestors had built. Her brother Ptolemy XIII was dead, drowned in the Nile under circumstances that remained suspiciously unclear. Now, only she and Cleopatra remained as potential heirs to the throne of Egypt. The princess moved through her morning rituals with practiced grace, though her mind raced with calculations and possibilities. Her Greek tutor would arrive within the hour, followed by lessons in mathematics, rhetoric, and the ancient Egyptian language that distinguished the Ptolemies from other Hellenistic rulers. But today, these scholarly pursuits seemed almost frivolous compared to the political maneuvering that would determine whether she lived to see another sunrise. As her servants helped her into a chiton of fine linen dyed the deep blue of lapis lazuli, Arsinoe reflected on the twisted genealogy that had brought her to this moment. The Ptolemaic tradition of sibling marriage had created a family tree that resembled a tangled vine more than the proud cedar it claimed to be. Her great-great-grandmother had been both sister and wife to Ptolemy II, establishing a precedent that subsequent generations had followed with religious devotion. These unions were intended to preserve the divine blood of Alexander the Great's general, but they had also produced a dynasty renowned for its internal violence and fraternal betrayal. The morning meal was served in the smaller dining chamber, where Arsinoe reclined on a couch adorned with ivory and gold. Dates from the oasis regions, fresh bread still warm from the palace ovens, and wine diluted with water from the sacred springs near Memphis filled the low table before her. Yet she barely tasted the delicacies as she listened to her advisors deliver their carefully worded reports about the political situation throughout the kingdom. Cleopatra had established herself in the northern districts with considerable popular support, particularly among the native Egyptian population who appreciated her fluency in their language and her adoption of traditional pharaonic customs. This connection to Egypt's ancient heritage gave her sister significant advantages that Arsinoe found difficult to counter. The younger princess had always been more comfortable with Greek culture and learning, viewing herself as heir to the intellectual traditions of the Museum and Library of Alexandria, rather than the mystical practices of the old pharaohs. The contradiction at the heart of Ptolemaic rule became increasingly apparent as the morning progressed. They were Greek monarchs governing an Egyptian kingdom, descendants of Macedonian generals who had claimed divinity through association with the land of the Nile. This cultural duality required constant negotiation and careful balance, skills that Cleopatra seemed to possess in abundance, while Arsinoe struggled to master them. By midday, the palace buzzed with activity as merchants, diplomats, and petitioners sought audiences with various members of the royal household. Arsinoe received them in a reception hall decorated with murals depicting the conquests of Alexander and the early Ptolemies. Each visitor brought news from different corners of the Mediterranean world, painting a picture of shifting alliances and emerging threats that would soon reshape the entire region. Roman civil war had erupted with unprecedented violence, pitting Julius Caesar against Pompey the Great in a conflict that would determine the future of the Republic. Egypt, with its vast wealth and strategic position, could not remain neutral in such a struggle. The decision of which Roman faction to support would likely determine not only the fate of the dynasty, but the survival of everyone within the palace walls. Arsinoe listened carefully as her spies reported on Cleopatra's movements and alliances. Her sister had already demonstrated remarkable political acumen by cultivating relationships with powerful Romans, but these connections came with dangerous obligations. The princess understood that accepting Roman support meant accepting Roman oversight, a compromise that could transform the proud pharaohs into mere client rulers dependent on foreign favor. The afternoon brought private consultations with the high priests of Ptah and Isis, religious authorities whose support remained crucial for legitimizing any claim to the throne. These conversations required delicate diplomacy, as the priests expected traditional Egyptian protocols, while Arsinoe felt more comfortable with Greek customs and philosophy. She found herself caught between worlds, neither fully Egyptian nor entirely Greek, struggling to embody the synthesis that successful Ptolemaic rulers had always managed to achieve. As shadows lengthened across the palace courtyards, Arsinoe walked through the famous library, its countless scrolls representing the accumulated knowledge of the ancient world. Here, scholars from across the Mediterranean had gathered for generations to study, debate, and preserve the wisdom of earlier civilizations. The library symbolized everything noble about Ptolemaic rule, its commitment to learning and cultural advancement that had made Alexandria the intellectual capital of the known world. Yet even this sanctuary of scholarship could not escape the political tensions that threatened to tear the kingdom apart. Librarians whispered about which scrolls might need to be hidden or destroyed to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. The great works of Aristotle, Euclid, and Eratosthenes suddenly seemed vulnerable to the same forces that had already claimed so many royal lives. Evening found Arsinoe in her private chambers, reviewing correspondence from governors throughout Egypt. Each letter revealed new challenges to royal authority, as local officials positioned themselves for whatever political changes might emerge from the current crisis. Some reported increased bandit activity along trade routes, while others described religious unrest and economic disruptions that accompanied periods of dynastic uncertainty. The princess understood that her sister's growing influence stemmed not merely from personal charisma, but from her ability to project stability and continuity in uncertain times. Cleopatra had mastered the art of appearing inevitable, creating the impression that her eventual triumph was ordained by the gods themselves. This psychological advantage proved more valuable than military strength or financial resources, though she possessed considerable amounts of both. As night fell over Alexandria, Arsinoe stood once again at her window, watching torches flicker along the harbour walls. Ships arrived and departed with the tide, carrying goods, messages, and perhaps armed men who would soon determine the outcome of the struggle for Egypt's throne. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, connecting Alexandria to Rome, Athens, and countless other cities where the fate of nations was decided by men who had never set foot in the land of the pharaohs. The princess retired to her bed, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and difficult decisions. Her sister's supporters grew more numerous each day, while her own position became increasingly precarious. Yet she also understood that the history of the Ptolemies was filled with unexpected reversals and dramatic comebacks, examples of rulers who had seemed defeated only to emerge triumphant through courage, intelligence, and careful timing. The palace settled into its nocturnal rhythms as guards took their positions and servants completed their final duties. In chambers throughout the great complex, other members of the royal household faced their own uncertainties about the future. Some would soon die for backing the wrong claimant, while others would rise to unprecedented heights of power and influence. The coming months would test everyone's loyalty, cunning, and survival instincts in ways that would echo through the corridors of history for millennia to come. Sleep came fitfully to Princess Arsinoe that night, her dreams haunted by visions of golden serpents and crumbling pyramids. When dawn broke over Alexandria, she found herself already awake, staring at the painted ceiling where ancient gods danced in eternal procession across azure skies. The palace stirred to life around her as servants moved through the corridors with practiced silence, their sandaled feet whispering secrets against marble floors worn smooth by 3 centuries of royal footsteps. The morning ritual began, as it always did, with the arrival of her personal attendants who had served the royal family since childhood. These women knew every scar, every birthmark, every secret that marked Arsinoe's body as surely as they knew the hidden passages that honeycomb the palace walls. They brought with them the daily intelligence that flowed through the servant networks, information often more valuable than the formal reports delivered by ministers and generals. Today's whispers carried particular urgency. Cleopatra had been seen boarding a ship at dawn, her destination unknown but her purpose clear. The elder sister was moving, making the kind of bold gestures that had already secured her the loyalty of Alexandria's merchant classes and the grudging respect of her Roman allies. Each day that passed without decisive action from Arsinoe strengthened Cleopatra's position and weakened her own claim to legitimacy. The princess submitted to the elaborate process of royal grooming with unusual patience, understanding that every detail of her appearance would be scrutinized and interpreted by those who sought signs of weakness or confidence. Her hair was arranged in the complex braids favored by Egyptian queens, each strand woven with golden threads that caught the morning light. Kohl darkened her eyes in the manner of Isis herself, while her lips were painted with red ochre mixed with precious oils from distant Nubia. The costume chosen for today's audiences reflected careful political calculation. Egyptian pleated linen spoke to her connection with the native population, while Greek jewelry and accessories maintained her Ptolemaic heritage. This delicate balance between 2 cultures had been the hallmark of successful pharaohs for generations, yet Arsinoe struggled to embody it with the natural grace that seemed to come so easily to her sister. Breakfast was served in the garden courtyard, where fountains sparkled in the strengthening sun and exotic birds called from gilded cages. The meal itself was a masterpiece of palace cuisine, combining ingredients from across the known world. Fresh fish from the Nile were prepared with spices from India, while fruits from the palace orchards were served alongside honey cakes flavored with wines from the Greek islands. Yet the princess found little pleasure in these delicacies, her appetite diminished by the weight of decisions that could not be postponed much longer. Her first appointment of the day was with Apollodorus, the clever Sicilian, who served as her private secretary and most trusted advisor. His loyalty had been proven through years of faithful service, yet Arsinoe sometimes wondered whether his devotion was to her personally or to whichever member of the royal family seemed most likely to survive the coming struggle. Such calculations were natural in palace life, where survival often depended on the ability to shift allegiances at precisely the right moment. Apollodorus brought disturbing news from the eastern provinces, where governors were beginning to declare their independence from royal authority altogether. The breakdown of central control threatened to fragment Egypt into competing principalities, each ruled by ambitious officials who saw opportunity in dynastic chaos. This development posed a threat greater than any individual rival, as it challenged the fundamental unity that had made Egypt a power capable of standing against Rome itself. The morning's second visitor was even more troubling. Ganymedes, the eunuch who commanded Arsinoe's personal guard, arrived with intelligence from his network of spies embedded throughout Cleopatra's court. The elder sister was planning something ambitious and dangerous, a move that would either secure her position permanently or destroy her completely. The details remained unclear, but the implications were unmistakable. Time was running out for anyone who hoped to challenge Cleopatra's growing dominance. As the sun reached its zenith, Arsinoe found herself in the palace archives, surrounded by papyrus scrolls that contained the accumulated wisdom of her ancestors. These documents recorded not only the official histories of Ptolemaic rule, but also the private correspondence and secret negotiations that revealed how power was truly exercised. She searched through these records for precedents and strategies that might help her navigate the current crisis. The scrolls told stories of previous succession struggles, each marked by the same patterns of alliance and betrayal that now shaped her own situation. Ptolemy IV had secured his throne by murdering his mother, while Ptolemy VIII had survived multiple attempts on his life through a combination of ruthlessness and luck. These histories offered lessons in survival, but they also demonstrated the terrible costs that dynastic struggles imposed on everyone involved. One document particularly caught her attention, a letter written by Ptolemy II to his sister wife Arsinoe II during their early years of joint rule. The correspondence revealed the delicate negotiations required to balance personal ambitions with dynastic responsibilities, showing how even the closest family relationships became matters of state policy. The letter's tone was affectionate, yet calculating, expressing genuine love while carefully delineating spheres of influence and authority. The afternoon brought a formal audience with representatives from Upper Egypt, the southern regions where pharaonic traditions remained strongest, and where native resentment of foreign rule simmered beneath the surface of official loyalty. These delegates spoke in measured phrases that concealed more than they revealed, their words chosen with the care of men who understood that a single misstatement could mean death for themselves and their families. Their message was clear, despite its diplomatic wrapping. The South would support whichever claimant could demonstrate both legitimate authority and respect for Egyptian customs. Cleopatra's public embrace of traditional pharaonic rituals had impressed these representatives, while Arsinoe's more obviously Greek sensibilities raised questions about her commitment to Egypt's ancient heritage. The princess realized that her sister's political instincts had once again proven superior to her own. Evening approached with the arrival of her most dangerous visitor, a Roman merchant whose true identity and purpose remained carefully hidden beneath layers of commercial pretense. This man spoke for powerful interests in the Eternal City, forces that viewed Egypt's wealth as a prize to be claimed by whichever faction could establish effective control. His presence in her chambers represented both an opportunity and a trap, as Roman support always came with obligations that could transform allies into subjects. The conversation that followed was conducted in the subtle language of diplomatic necessity, each party probing the other's intentions while revealing as little as possible about their own plans. The Romans spoke of trade agreements and mutual benefits, while Arsinoe listened for the unspoken threats that lurked beneath his polished phrases. Both understood that Egypt's independence hung in the balance of decisions that would be made in the coming days. As darkness fell over Alexandria, the princess dismissed her attendants and walked alone through the palace's moonlit corridors. The familiar spaces seemed different in the silver light, transformed from symbols of power into reminders of mortality. Every shadow could conceal an assassin. Every footstep might herald news that would change everything. The weight of centuries pressed down upon her shoulders as she contemplated the responsibility of preserving a dynasty that had ruled Egypt since the time of Alexander's conquests. Her final stop was the private shrine where her family had worshipped for generations, a small chamber decorated with images of both Greek and Egyptian deities. Here, Ptolemaic rulers had sought divine guidance during moments of crisis, offering prayers and sacrifices to gods who seemed increasingly distant from mortal concerns. Arsinoe knelt before the altar, her silk robes rustling against marble floors worn smooth by the knees of her ancestors. The princess remained in prayer long after the palace had settled into silence, seeking wisdom that seemed beyond human understanding. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and dangerous opportunities, decisions that could elevate her to the throne or consign her to the tomb. The gods who watched over Egypt had guided the Ptolemies through 3 centuries of triumph and tragedy, but their favor was never guaranteed, and their protection could be withdrawn without warning. When she finally returned to her chambers, Arsinoe found a message waiting on her private table. its seal bearing the mark of her sister's ring. The papyrus contained only a few lines written in Cleopatra's distinctive hand, but those words carried implications that would reshape the entire conflict. Her sister was proposing a meeting, a face-to-face encounter that could end either in reconciliation or assassination. The princess sat motionless for long minutes, weighing the risks and possibilities that Cleopatra's invitation presented. Such meetings were traditional in Ptolemaic succession disputes, moments when siblings attempted to resolve their differences through negotiation rather than warfare. Yet they were also opportunities for treachery, as history provided numerous examples of royal relatives who had died at such supposedly peaceful encounters. The dawn brought no clarity to Arsinoe's troubled mind as she contemplated her sister's cryptic message. The proposed meeting carried echoes of their great-aunt's fate, Arsinoe III, who had accepted a similar invitation only to disappear forever into the depths of the palace dungeons. Yet refusing Cleopatra's overture would signal weakness, an admission that she lacked the courage to face her rival directly. The youngest princess understood that in the deadly calculus of Ptolemaic politics, perception often mattered more than reality. Her morning preparations took on new significance as she selected garments and jewelry that would convey strength without appearing threatening. The delicate balance required careful consideration of every detail, from the arrangement of her hair to the choice of perfume that would linger in the air long after she departed. Her servants moved with unusual tension, their whispered conversations betraying anxiety about their mistress's safety and their own uncertain futures should the day end badly. The palace stirred earlier than usual, as word of the impending meeting spread through the corridors like wildfire. Courtiers who had maintained careful neutrality suddenly found themselves forced to choose sides, their previous calculations rendered obsolete by the prospect of decisive action. Some departed quietly for their country estates, while others lingered near the throne room, hoping to witness whatever resolution might emerge from the sisters' confrontation. Arsinoe's breakfast was brought to her private study, where she attempted to maintain the appearance of normalcy while her mind raced through possible scenarios. The food remained largely untouched as she reviewed intelligence reports from her remaining allies, each document reinforcing her growing isolation within the palace hierarchy. Even her most trusted advisors seemed to be positioning themselves for whatever outcome might emerge from the day's events. The morning sun climbed higher as preparations continued throughout the royal quarter. Guards took new positions along the corridors that would witness the historic encounter, their bronze armor gleaming in the filtered light that streamed through alabaster windows. The very stones of the palace seemed to hold their breath, as if the ancient building itself understood the magnitude of what was about to unfold within its walls. Cleopatra arrived precisely at the appointed hour, her procession moving through the palace with the measured dignity befitting a pharaoh. Her retinue was smaller than protocol demanded, but more impressive in its careful selection of supporters. Each face that accompanied the elder sister had been chosen to send specific messages about loyalty, competence, and the inevitability of her ultimate triumph. The psychological warfare had begun before the sisters even entered the same room. The meeting chamber selected for their encounter was the Hall of Judgment, where Ptolemaic rulers had traditionally received foreign ambassadors and settled disputes between noble families. Its walls bore frescoes depicting the weighing of hearts in the afterlife, scenes from the Egyptian Book of the Dead that reminded all who entered of the eternal consequences of earthly actions. The symbolism was unmistakable, transforming their private conversation into a tribunal where divine justice would ultimately prevail. Arsinoe entered first, claiming the psychological advantage of receiving her sister as a guest rather than approaching as a supplicant. She positioned herself before the throne that had remained empty since their father's death, its golden surface reflecting the morning light that streamed through windows set high in the chamber walls. Every gesture was calculated to project confidence, while maintaining the respect due to family bonds that transcended political rivalry. When Cleopatra finally appeared in the doorway, The air itself seemed to change, charged with the electricity that accompanies moments of historical significance. The elder sister moved with the fluid grace that had already captivated Roman generals and Egyptian priests alike, her presence commanding attention even in the familiar surroundings of the palace where she had spent her childhood. Her costume blended Egyptian and Greek elements with masterful subtlety, declaring her identity as both Pharaoh and Ptolemy without favoring either tradition. The formal greetings required by royal protocol could not disguise the tension that crackled between the sisters as they approached each other across the marble floor. Each word was weighted with meaning, every gesture analyzed for signs of weakness or hostile intent. The carefully choreographed dance of diplomacy played out against the backdrop of centuries of family history, each sister drawing upon lessons learned from ancestors who had faced similar moments of decision. Their conversation began with expressions of mutual concern for Egypt's welfare, the traditional language that allowed royal siblings to discuss succession without immediately resorting to open threats. Cleopatra spoke of the kingdom's need for stable leadership in troubled times, while Arsinoe emphasized the importance of legitimate authority derived from proper bloodlines and divine approval. Neither sister directly challenged the other's right to rule, but both understood the implications of their carefully chosen words. The discussion gradually moved toward more specific matters as morning stretched toward midday. Cleopatra outlined her vision for Egypt's future, describing alliances with Rome that could preserve the kingdom's independence while ensuring its prosperity. Her plans demonstrated remarkable sophistication in their understanding of Mediterranean politics, revealing intelligence networks and diplomatic connections that surprised even her well-informed sister. The elder princess had clearly been preparing for this moment far longer than anyone had realized. Arsinoe responded with her own analysis of the regional situation, emphasizing the dangers of excessive dependence on Roman favor and the importance of maintaining Egypt's traditional autonomy. Her arguments drew upon classical Greek political philosophy and Egyptian religious traditions, presenting an alternative vision that prioritized cultural continuity over immediate practical advantages. The debate revealed fundamental differences in how the sisters understood their inheritance and their responsibilities to future generations. As the sun reached its zenith, their discussion took on more personal dimensions, touching upon childhood memories and shared experiences that transcended political calculation. For brief moments, the weight of dynasty and throne seemed to lift, allowing glimpses of the affection that had once bound them together as children exploring the palace gardens and listening to their tutors' lessons. These interludes of genuine emotion made the underlying conflict even more poignant, reminding both sisters of what their rivalry was costing them. Yet the demands of succession could not be ignored indefinitely, and their conversation inevitably returned to questions of power and legitimacy. Cleopatra proposed a division of authority that would allow both sisters to rule jointly, sharing responsibilities according to their respective strengths and interests. The suggestion carried precedence from earlier Ptolemaic history, when sibling partnerships had successfully governed Egypt for extended periods. However, both women understood that such arrangements required absolute trust between partners, a commodity that had become increasingly scarce in their relationship. The afternoon brought news from the harbour that interrupted their negotiations with unwelcome urgency. Roman ships had been sighted approaching Alexandria, their identity and intentions unknown, but their timing ominous. The sisters' private discussion suddenly acquired new dimensions as external pressures threatened to overwhelm their domestic concerns. Whatever resolution they reached would need to address not only their personal rivalry, but also the larger forces that were reshaping the entire Mediterranean world. Cleopatra's reaction to this development revealed the extent of her preparations for the current crisis. She produced documents that detailed extensive correspondence with Roman commanders, evidence of negotiations that had been proceeding for months without Arsinoe's knowledge. The elder sister had clearly anticipated this moment and positioned herself to benefit from whatever outcomes might emerge from Rome's civil war. Her foresight was impressive, but it also confirmed Arsinoe's suspicions about the true extent of foreign influence in her sister's plans. The younger princess found herself confronted with a choice that would define not only her own fate, but the future direction of Egyptian civilization. She could accept Cleopatra's proposal for shared rule, acknowledging her sister's superior position while retaining some measure of authority and dignity. Alternatively, she could reject the compromise and face the consequences of continued resistance against increasingly impossible odds. Neither option offered the complete victory she had once imagined possible, but both carried implications that extended far beyond personal considerations. As shadows began to lengthen across the chamber floor, their discussion approached its inevitable conclusion. The formal language of diplomacy could no longer disguise the fundamental incompatibility of their positions, despite the genuine efforts both sisters had made to find common ground. Cleopatra's final offer was generous by any reasonable standard, but it required Arsinoe to abandon claims that she viewed as matters of principle rather than mere political convenience. The younger sister's response would echo through the halls of the palace within minutes and reach the farthest provinces within days. Her words would determine whether Egypt faced the future united under dual rule or divided by continued civil war. The gods who had guided the Ptolemies through 3 centuries of triumph and tragedy seemed to hold their breath as Princess Arsinoe prepared to speak the words that would seal her destiny and shape the final chapter of her dynasty's remarkable history. In that moment of decision, surrounded by frescoes depicting eternal judgment and divine justice, Arsinoe understood that she faced a choice between practical wisdom and idealistic principle. Her sister's proposal offered survival and partial victory, while rejection promised either complete triumph or total destruction. The weight of centuries pressed upon her shoulders as she contemplated not only her own future, but the legacy she would leave for generations yet unborn in the land of the pharaohs. The silence stretched between the sisters like a taut bowstring, each heartbeat echoing through the hall of judgment as Arsinoe weighed words that would reshape an empire. The frescoes seemed to lean inward, ancient gods bearing witness to a moment that would determine whether the blood of Alexander's general would continue to flow through pharaonic veins or spill uselessly upon marble floors, worn smooth by centuries of royal footsteps. When Arsinoe finally spoke, her voice carried the crystalline clarity that had marked Ptolemaic queens since the dynasty's founding. She declined her sister's generous offer with words wrapped in silk but sharp as bronze daggers. The younger princess understood that accepting joint rule would transform her from potential pharaoh into junior partner, her authority forever subordinate to Cleopatra's superior position and Roman connections. Better to face destruction with dignity and tact than to accept survival purchased through the surrender of legitimate claims. Cleopatra received this rejection with the composure that had already impressed foreign ambassadors and domestic rivals alike. Her expression revealed neither surprise nor anger, suggesting that she had anticipated this outcome and prepared accordingly. The elder sister's final words carried both regret for their personal relationship and warning about the consequences of continued resistance. She departed the chamber with the same measured dignity that had marked her arrival, leaving behind only the lingering scent of jasmine perfume and the weight of irrevocable decisions. The palace transformed within hours as news of the failed negotiations spread through corridors already charged with expectation. Servants who had served both sisters since childhood found themselves forced to choose loyalties that would determine their survival in the coming storm. Some departed quietly for distant relatives in the countryside, while others aligned themselves more explicitly with whichever princess seemed most likely to emerge victorious from the approaching conflict. Arsinoe returned to her private chambers to find her most trusted advisors already assembled, their faces grave with understanding of what her decision would cost. Apollodorus presented updated intelligence about Cleopatra's military preparations, revealing the extent to which the elder sister had been planning for exactly this eventuality. Roman gold had purchased loyalty throughout the army, while Egyptian priests had been carefully cultivated through generous donations to temple treasuries and respectful participation in ancient religious ceremonies. The strategic situation was deteriorating rapidly as provincial governors began declaring their allegiances based on calculations that favored immediate security over abstract principles of legitimacy. Upper Egypt remained potentially loyal to Arsinoe's cause, but only if she could demonstrate capacity for effective resistance. Lower Egypt and Alexandria itself increasingly recognized Cleopatra as the inevitable victor, their submission motivated by practical concerns rather than genuine enthusiasm for her rule. Evening brought reports from the harbor that confirmed everyone's worst fears about foreign intervention. The Roman ships belonged to Julius Caesar himself, the victor of Gaul, whose civil war against Pompey had reached its climactic phase. Caesar's arrival in Alexandria represented either salvation or catastrophe for Egypt, depending entirely on which sister could secure his support. The stakes of their sibling rivalry had suddenly escalated beyond dynastic succession to questions of national independence itself. Arsinoe spent the night in consultations with military commanders who remained loyal to her cause, planning desperate strategies that might yet reverse her deteriorating position. The palace guard could be trusted, but their numbers were insufficient to resist sustained siege. The Royal Navy offered better prospects, as several captains remained committed to her legitimacy, despite Cleopatra's growing influence among their colleagues. A fighting retreat to Upper Egypt might allow time to rally support from regions where traditional Egyptian culture remained strongest. Dawn revealed the full extent of Caesar's fleet anchored in Alexandria's harbour, their bronze rams gleaming like spear points in the early light. The Roman general had brought enough legions to settle Egypt's succession dispute through force if necessary, though his preference would surely be for diplomatic solutions that served his broader strategic objectives. Whichever sister could present herself as the more valuable ally would likely receive his backing, regardless of their respective claims to legitimacy through birth or tradition. The morning's first crisis came with news that several key palace officials had defected during the night, taking with them detailed knowledge of Arsinoe's military preparations and political alliances. These betrayals struck at the heart of her remaining security, transforming trusted advisors into potential sources of intelligence for her enemies. The younger princess realized that her position within the palace itself was becoming untenable as support continued to erode with each passing hour. Cleopatra's response to Caesar's arrival demonstrated the political sophistication that had already distinguished her reign. Rather than waiting passively for the Roman general to summon her, the elder sister arranged her own dramatic entrance that would capture his attention while showcasing her intelligence and resourcefulness. The famous carpet incident that would echo through history began with careful planning in chambers where Arsinoe had once played as a child, transformed now into headquarters for operations that would determine Egypt's future. The younger sister watched from her window as Apollodorus carried out his mistress's audacious plan, smuggling Cleopatra into Caesar's presence through methods that bypassed both protocol and security. The gesture was simultaneously humble and imperious, presenting the elder princess as a suppliant, while demonstrating capabilities that impressed even experienced Roman commanders. Within hours, the political dynamics that had governed Egypt for months were completely transformed by a single bold stroke. Arsinoe understood immediately that her sister's gambit had succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Caesar's fascination with Cleopatra extended beyond mere political calculation to encompass personal attraction that would influence his decisions in ways that transcended rational analysis. The Roman general who had conquered Gaul and crossed the Rubicon found himself captivated by an Egyptian queen whose intelligence matched his own and whose ambitions complemented his vision for Mediterranean dominance. The palace began to empty as courtiers rushed to align themselves with the new reality of Roman-backed rule. Arsinoe's remaining supporters melted away like morning mist, their loyalty unable to withstand the combined pressure of foreign legions and domestic opportunism. Even her personal servants started to disappear, taking with them intimate knowledge of her habits and routines that could prove valuable to her enemies. By midday, the younger princess found herself effectively under house arrest within her own chambers, surrounded by guards whose loyalties had quietly shifted to reflect the new balance of power. The golden cage that had once represented privilege and security now served as prison, its beautiful decorations unable to disguise the fundamental change in her circumstances. Every luxury that surrounded her became a reminder of how quickly fortune could transform blessing into curse. Her final visitors were representatives of the new order, officials who had once served her father, but now came bearing ultimatums wrapped in diplomatic courtesy. They offered her safe passage to Rome as Caesar's honored guest, a form of gilded exile that would preserve her life while removing any threat to Cleopatra's consolidated rule. The alternative remained unspoken, but clearly understood by everyone present in the chamber. Arsinoe's response revealed the courage that had marked Ptolemaic women throughout their dynasty's history. She accepted exile with dignity befitting her royal blood, understanding that survival itself represented a form of victory under the circumstances. Her departure from Egypt would be temporary, she declared, though privately she suspected that she might never again see the lighthouse of Alexandria or walk through the palace gardens where she had spent her childhood years. The preparations for her journey consumed the remaining daylight hours as servants packed belongings that would accompany her into uncertain exile. Each item selected carried memories of a life that was ending, from jewelry inherited from her grandmother to scrolls containing poetry written during happier times. The princess chose her possessions carefully, knowing that whatever she left behind would likely be distributed among her sister's supporters as rewards for their loyalty. Night fell over Alexandria as Arsinoe took her final walk through the palace corridors, memorizing details that would have to sustain her through years of separation from everything familiar. The marble floors that had echoed with her footsteps since childhood would soon know only strangers' tread, while the chambers where she had studied and dreamed would be occupied by officials serving her sister's administration. The weight of ending pressed upon her shoulders as she contemplated the magnitude of what she was leaving behind. Her last act as a resident of the great palace was to visit the family shrine where generations of Ptolemies had sought divine guidance during moments of crisis. She offered prayers not for her own salvation, but for Egypt's welfare under whatever rulers would follow. The gods who had protected her ancestors through 3 centuries of triumph and tragedy received her final petitions with the same mysterious silence that had marked their responses to previous appeals for aid during dynastic struggles. When dawn broke over Alexandria on the day of her departure, Arsinoe was already aboard the ship that would carry her toward an uncertain future in Rome. The harbor where she had played as a child and watched trading vessels from across the Mediterranean world slowly receded as her vessel joined Caesar's fleet for the journey westward. Egypt's coastline disappeared into morning haze, taking with it everything she had known and loved since birth. The voyage to Rome would last several weeks, providing ample time for reflection on the rapid sequence of events that had transformed her from potential pharaoh to imperial prisoner. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly in all directions, its blue waters connecting the civilization she was leaving to the one that awaited her arrival. Dolphins played in the ship's wake while seabirds called overhead, their freedom a sharp contrast to her own carefully managed captivity. Arsinoe spent her days on deck, watching the changing coastlines that marked their progress toward the Eternal City. Each headland and island carried its own history of conquest and colonization, reminders of how the Roman eagles had spread their dominion across the ancient world. Soon, she would walk the streets where senators debated and gladiators died, experiencing firsthand the power that now shaped her homeland's destiny from 1,000 miles away. The princess understood that her story was far from over, though its next chapters would unfold in settings she could barely imagine. Rome offered opportunities as well as dangers for someone with her intelligence and royal bloodline, possibilities that might yet allow her to influence events in Egypt, despite her physical separation from the land of her birth. The teenage girl who had once competed with Cleopatra for their father's throne was about to discover whether the same qualities that had brought her to the edge of victory might yet serve her in the alien environment of republican politics and imperial ambition. The ship carrying Arsinoe IV westward toward Rome also carried the hopes and fears of everyone who had supported her claim to Egypt's throne. Their fates would be decided by her sister's mercy or lack thereof, while her own future depended on her ability to navigate the complex world of Roman politics with the same intelligence that had distinguished her during the succession struggle. The final act of her remarkable story was about to begin in the city that ruled the world. The ship's gentle rocking became Arsinoe's only companion as the Egyptian coastline faded into memory. Days blended into nights aboard the Roman vessel, each sunrise bringing her closer to a destiny she had never imagined possible. The Mediterranean that had once connected her to the furthest reaches of the Ptolemaic trading empire now served as a barrier between her past and an uncertain future stretching beyond the horizon. Her quarters, though comfortable by any reasonable standard, felt cramped after the vast chambers of the great palace. A single window provided glimpses of endless blue water, while her belongings fit easily into a wooden chest that would have barely filled one corner of her former dressing room. The contrast served as a constant reminder of how completely her circumstances had changed in the space of a few fateful weeks. Roman officers assigned to guard her maintained respectful distance while ensuring she remained under constant observation. Their presence transformed every meal, every walk on deck, every moment of private reflection into a performance monitored by men whose loyalty belonged entirely to Caesar and his vision for Mediterranean dominance. The princess learned to live within invisible boundaries, her freedom measured in carefully supervised steps along the vessel's narrow walkways. The other passengers aboard the ship represented a cross-section of Roman society, returning home after various missions throughout the eastern provinces. Merchants spoke of profitable ventures in Syrian markets, while diplomats discussed delicate negotiations with client kings who balanced autonomy against submission. Soldiers recounted campaigns in distant lands where Roman eagles had planted new standards of conquest. Each conversation reminded Arsinoe of the vast machinery of empire that had ultimately overwhelmed her small kingdom's ancient independence. Meals in the ship's common area provided opportunities to observe Roman customs and social hierarchies that would soon govern her daily existence. She noticed how conversations flowed around topics of politics and profit, how deference was paid to rank and achievement rather than birth alone. The easy familiarity between officers and civilian officials suggested a society more fluid than the rigid protocols of Ptolemaic court life. Yet underlying tensions revealed themselves in careful word choices and calculated silences. The princess spent long hours studying Latin scrolls borrowed from the ship's modest library, determined to master the language that would be essential for survival in her new environment. Her Greek education provided some foundation, but Latin's practical vocabulary and legal terminology required patient memorization that filled otherwise empty days with purposeful activity. Each new word represented a small victory over circumstances beyond her control. Evening brought private moments when she could stand at the stern rail and watch Alexandria's lighthouse fade into distant memory. The beacon that had guided ships safely home for 3 centuries now served as a symbol of everything she was leaving behind. Its light grew fainter each night until it disappeared entirely, severed her final visible connection to the land where Ptolemies had ruled since Alexander's death. Dreams carried her back to the palace gardens where she had played with Cleopatra during their childhood years, before rivalry and ambition had transformed sisterly affection into deadly competition. These nocturnal journeys provided both comfort and torment, allowing her to revisit happiness that seemed impossibly distant from her current circumstances. she would wake to find her pillow damp with tears shed for a past that could never be recovered. The ship made brief stops at various ports along their route, each offering glimpses of Roman provincial administration in action. Local officials boarded to deliver reports and receive instructions, their business conducted with efficient precision that impressed even Arsinoe's critical eye. The empire's success clearly depended on more than military conquest, drawing strength from administrative systems that transformed diverse populations into productive subjects. At Cyprus, she watched Roman engineers directing harbour improvements that would increase the island's capacity for Mediterranean trade. The workers included Greeks, Phoenicians, and native Cypriots, labouring together under Roman supervision, their combined efforts creating infrastructure that would benefit the empire for generations. The site reinforced her understanding of how Roman power integrated conquered peoples into larger purposes, rather than simply exploiting them for immediate gain. Rhodes provided an even more striking example of this collaborative approach to imperial governance. The famous Colossus had fallen centuries earlier, but the island's commercial vitality continued under Roman protection. Arsinoe walked through markets where goods from across the known world changed hands, while Roman law provided the stable framework that made such extensive trade networks possible. The prosperity she witnessed suggested that submission to Roman authority might offer compensations that balanced the loss of political independence. The final approach to Rome's port at Ostia brought new anxieties as Arsinoe contemplated her reception in the imperial capital. Caesar's treatment of her would establish precedents that influenced her entire future, while Roman public opinion could transform her from honoured guest to despised captive, depending on political circumstances beyond her control. Everything depended on her ability to present herself as valuable ally rather than dangerous enemy to Roman interests. The harbour at Ostia bustled with activity that dwarfed even Alexandria's busy waterfront. Ships from every corner of the Mediterranean unloaded cargoes that fed and supplied the world's largest city, while passengers of every nationality and social station crowded the docks seeking transport to various destinations. The sheer scale of commercial activity demonstrated Roman prosperity in ways that no military parade could match. Her escort through the port attracted curious stares from civilians who recognized her foreign dress and royal bearing. Whispered conversations followed in her wake as Romans speculated about her identity and the circumstances that had brought an obviously high-ranking prisoner to their shores. Some faces showed sympathy for her obvious displacement, while others displayed the calculating interest of people who saw opportunity in others' misfortune. The road from Ostia to Rome carried them through countryside that revealed the agricultural foundation underlying urban grandeur. Well-maintained farms stretched in every direction, their organized efficiency a stark contrast to the traditional Egyptian system of seasonal flooding and ancient custom. Roman engineering had imposed geometric order on landscape that served practical purposes, while demonstrating the rational principles that guided imperial administration. Villages along the route showed evidence of prosperity that extended Roman benefits far beyond the capital itself. Public buildings constructed with imperial funds provided forums for local governance and commerce, while aqueducts brought fresh water to communities that had previously depended on wells and seasonal streams. The infrastructure investments created loyalty through tangible improvements to daily life, rather than relying solely on military intimidation. As they approached Rome itself, traffic on the road increased dramatically, with merchants, officials, and travelers of every description converging on the imperial capital. The diversity of languages and costumes reflected the empire's vast reach, while the general prosperity of even common citizens suggested that Roman rule provided benefits that extended throughout society. Arsinoe began to understand why resistance to imperial expansion had proved so ineffective across the Mediterranean world. The first glimpse of Rome's walls and monuments took her breath away with their massive scale and architectural sophistication. The city spread across its famous 7 hills, like a vast organism, its growth directed by human intelligence rather than natural topography. Temples, theatres, and public buildings rose above residential districts in carefully planned arrangements that served both practical needs and aesthetic ambitions. Her entry into the city proper created small crowds of curious onlookers who had heard rumours about the Egyptian princess being brought to Rome as Caesar's captive. Their reactions ranged from sympathetic interest to hostile suspicion, reflecting the complex attitudes Romans held toward foreign royalty who had opposed imperial expansion. Ursino maintained dignified composure despite the uncomfortable scrutiny, understanding that her behaviour during these first public appearances would influence Roman perceptions for months to come. The house assigned for her residence surprised her with its elegance and comfort, though she understood that luxury could not disguise her fundamental status as prisoner. Located in a prestigious district near the Forum, the building provided accommodations worthy of her royal birth while ensuring easy surveillance by Caesar's agents. Gardens offered private spaces for reflection, while reception rooms allowed for the social interactions that would be essential for building support among influential Romans. Her first Roman dinner party revealed social customs that differed dramatically from Egyptian court protocols. Guests reclined on couches arranged around low tables laden with foods from across the empire, their conversations flowing freely between topics of politics, philosophy, and personal gossip. The informal atmosphere encouraged participation from women as well as men, suggesting opportunities for influence that had been impossible within traditional Ptolemaic hierarchies. The evening's most significant encounter came through introduction to Servilia, Caesar's former mistress, whose intelligence and political connections made her one of Rome's most influential women. Their conversation, conducted in fluent Greek, revealed shared interests in literature and philosophy that transcended their different cultural backgrounds. Servilia's friendship could provide access to social circles where Ursino might rebuild influence despite her exile from Egypt. Days in Rome developed their own rhythms as the princess learned to navigate urban life so different from anything she had previously experienced. Morning walks through public gardens revealed Roman attitudes toward leisure and community gathering, while afternoon visits to temples provided insights into religious practices that blended tradition with political necessity. Evening entertainments introduced her to social networks that connected every aspect of metropolitan life. The Roman Forum became her favorite destination during supervised excursions, its magnificent buildings and bustling crowds offering endless opportunities for observation and learning. She watched senators debate policies that affected millions of people across 3 continents, their oratory demonstrating rhetorical skills that rivaled anything she had heard in Alexandria's schools. The spectacle of Republican governance in action provided education that no tutor could have offered. Markets throughout the city revealed the material foundations of Roman power through goods that arrived daily from every corner of the empire. Egyptian grain fed the urban masses, while Spanish silver funded military campaigns and public works projects. Germanic amber competed with Indian pearls in luxury shops that catered to aristocratic tastes, while common citizens enjoyed access to products that would have been impossible luxuries in their grandparents' generation. Bathhouses offered unexpected insights into Roman social customs as citizens of every class gathered for relaxation and conversation in settings that encouraged equality despite obvious differences in wealth and status. The democratic atmosphere of these public facilities contrasted sharply with the rigid hierarchies that governed formal political institutions, suggesting that Roman society allowed for social mobility and interaction in ways that traditional kingdoms actively discouraged. Gladiatorial games provided her first exposure to Roman attitudes toward violence and entertainment that differed dramatically from Egyptian sensibilities. The crowd's enthusiasm for combat and death revealed cultural values that celebrated martial prowess while accepting brutality as a natural consequence of competition. Yet she also noticed subtle distinctions in how different types of contests were received. suggesting that Roman bloodlust operated within moral frameworks that distinguished acceptable from excessive violence. Theatre performances offered more familiar territory, where Greek classics competed with Roman innovations for audience approval. The adaptations of traditional stories revealed how Roman culture absorbed and transformed influences from conquered territories, creating hybrid forms that served imperial purposes while respecting local traditions. Watching these performances helped Arsinoe understand how she might find her own place within Roman cultural synthesis. Religious festivals throughout the calendar year demonstrated how imperial administration used ceremonial occasions to reinforce political messages, while satisfying popular desires for celebration and community participation. The carefully orchestrated events combined ancient traditions with contemporary propaganda, creating shared experiences that unified diverse populations under Roman authority while maintaining local customs that provided cultural continuity. Private tutoring sessions with Roman scholars expanded her education in directions that would have been impossible in Alexandria's more traditional academic environment. Legal studies introduced her to principles of jurisprudence that governed imperial administration, while historical analysis revealed patterns of conquest and integration that explained Roman success where other empires had failed. The intellectual stimulation partially compensated for her political powerlessness. Correspondence with contacts throughout the Mediterranean world kept her informed about developments in Egypt and other regions where her family's influence had once extended. Letters arrived irregularly, but provided precious connections to the world beyond Rome, while her own carefully censored responses maintained relationships that might prove valuable if circumstances ever allowed her return to active political life. The changing seasons in central Italy differed dramatically from Egypt's predictable cycle of flood and harvest, introducing her to weather patterns and agricultural rhythms that shaped Roman attitudes toward time and planning. Snow-covered hills in winter gave way to spring flowers and summer heat that tested her adaptation to climate and customs far removed from everything familiar. Each seasonal transition marked another step in her gradual transformation from Egyptian princess to Roman resident. As months passed into her first full year of exile, Arsinoe began to understand that her survival depended not on dreams of restoration, but on her ability to create new purposes within the constraints of her captivity. The skills that had prepared her to rule Egypt might yet serve different ends in Roman society, where intelligence and ambition could find outlets through patronage, scholarship, and social influence that transcended formal political power. Her story was far from over, though its next chapters would unfold according to rules and opportunities she was still learning to understand. The teenage princess who had once competed with Cleopatra for their father's throne was discovering that defeat in one arena might yet lead to unexpected victories in others, if she possessed the wisdom to recognize possibilities that lay hidden within apparent disaster. The Roman winter of 47 BCE settled over the city like a heavy blanket, bringing with it routines that slowly transformed Arsinoe's exile into something resembling ordinary life. Her days began before dawn with the sound of rain on terracotta tiles, a rhythm so different from the dry winds that had swept across Alexandria's harbour. She would lie in bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a Roman household stirring to life, servants moving through corridors with practiced efficiency as they prepared for another day in the imperial capital. Her morning ablutions had adapted to Roman customs, though she maintained certain Egyptian practices that provided comfort through their familiarity. The water brought for washing came from aqueducts that carried mountain springs across impossible distances, engineering marvels that demonstrated Roman mastery over nature itself. She would dress in Roman-style tunics that had gradually replaced her Egyptian garments, though she kept her father's ring hidden beneath the fabric as a reminder of who she truly was. Breakfast consisted of bread, cheese, and watered wine, served in a small chamber overlooking the house's central garden. The food was simple but plentiful, reflecting Roman attitudes toward morning meals that prioritized sustenance over ceremony. She ate slowly, savoring these moments of solitude before the day brought its inevitable interactions with guards, tutors, and the various Roman officials who monitored her activities with polite persistence. The house assigned for her residence had become both sanctuary and prison, its rooms familiar now after months of careful exploration. The library contained scrolls in Latin and Greek that provided intellectual nourishment, while the garden offered space for exercise and reflection under the watchful eyes of her assigned protectors. Every corner held memories of conversations, lessons, and quiet moments that were gradually weaving themselves into the fabric of her new existence. Her morning lessons with Marcus Tullius, a freedman scholar who served as her primary tutor, had evolved from basic Latin instruction into sophisticated discussions of Roman law and political philosophy. The old man possessed patience and wisdom that reminded her of her childhood teachers in Alexandria, though his perspectives reflected experiences shaped by slavery, manumission, and gradual acceptance into Roman intellectual circles. Their conversations revealed complexities of imperial society that no amount of observation could have taught her. Marcus spoke often of the delicate balance required to navigate Roman social hierarchies, where birth mattered less than achievement, but where origins could never be entirely forgotten. He shared stories of other foreign nobles who had found success in Rome through careful cultivation of useful relationships and strategic demonstration of their value to imperial interests. These examples provided models for behavior while reinforcing her understanding that survival required constant adaptation to changing circumstances. The morning hours flew by as they discussed everything from agricultural policy to military strategy, her tutor drawing connections between theoretical knowledge and practical applications that governed daily life throughout the empire. She began to appreciate how Roman success stemmed not from any single innovation, but from systematic approaches to problems that other societies handled through tradition or improvisation. The empire's strength lay in its ability to learn from every culture it encountered while maintaining core principles that provided stability across vast distances. By midday, the winter sun provided enough warmth for walks through Rome's bustling streets, always accompanied by discreet guards who maintained protective distance while ensuring she remained under constant supervision. These excursions had become essential for her mental health, providing stimulation and human contact that compensated for the isolation inherent in her status as royal prisoner. The crowds no longer stared with obvious curiosity, having grown accustomed to her presence among the city's diverse population of foreign residents. The Forum remained her favorite destination, its magnificent buildings serving as classrooms where she could observe Roman governance in action. She watched senators arrive for debates, their togas arranged with careful attention to political symbolism that communicated messages about factional loyalty and personal ambition. The oratory she heard demonstrated rhetorical skills that surpassed even Alexandria's famous schools, while the subjects under discussion revealed the complexity of administering an empire that spanned 3 continents. Market districts provided different but equally valuable education in the practical mechanics of Roman prosperity. Merchants from every corner of the known world conducted business in languages she was gradually learning to recognize, their transactions facilitated by currency systems and legal frameworks that made commerce possible across cultural boundaries. She marveled at the organization required to supply a city of over 1 million inhabitants with food, materials, and luxuries drawn from every province of the empire. The afternoon brought social obligations that had become increasingly important, as her circle of Roman acquaintances expanded beyond the initial contacts arranged by her captors. Tea parties and informal gatherings provided opportunities to practice conversation skills while gathering intelligence about political developments that might affect her future. These events required careful performance, balancing dignity with deference, intelligence with humility, foreign perspective with growing Roman sensibilities. Her friendship with Servilia had deepened into genuine affection based on shared intellectual interests and mutual respect for each other's intelligence and experience. The older woman's guidance proved invaluable for understanding Roman social customs, and unspoken rules that governed behavior among the city's elite families. Their private conversations often touched on topics that would have been dangerous to discuss in public, providing Arsinoe with insights into political currents that flowed beneath the surface of official pronouncements. Evening meals had evolved into sophisticated affairs, where her house hosted small gatherings of scholars, minor officials, and curious Romans who sought exotic conversation and foreign perspectives on contemporary issues. These dinners served multiple purposes, maintaining her social connections while demonstrating her value as an intelligent and cultured addition to Roman intellectual life. The conversations ranged across philosophy, literature, and current events, with a freedom that would have been impossible within the rigid protocols of Ptolemaic court life. The entertainment at these gatherings often included recitations of poetry, both classical Greek works and contemporary Roman compositions that reflected the cultural synthesis occurring throughout the empire. She contributed her own knowledge of Egyptian literature and religious traditions, finding that Roman guests appreciated insights into ancient wisdom while remaining confident in their own civilization's superiority. These cultural exchanges provided models for how she might carve out a meaningful role despite her political powerlessness. Religious observances had required the most difficult adjustments to Roman life, as imperial authorities expected foreign residents to participate in state ceremonies while tolerating private devotions to ancestral deities. She learned to balance public conformity with personal faith, attending Roman festivals while maintaining private shrines where she could honor the gods of her fathers. The compromise felt uncomfortable, but necessary for survival in a society where religious nonconformity could be interpreted as political disloyalty. The Roman calendar's religious festivals provided structure to her year, while introducing her to the complex relationship between state power and divine authority that characterized imperial ideology. She participated in ceremonies honoring Jupiter, Mars, and the other Roman gods, while observing how these rituals reinforced social hierarchies and political messages. The spectacles were magnificent, but alien, lacking the intimate connection to natural cycles that had characterized Egyptian religious practices. Winter evenings were spent in her private chambers, reading by lamplight while rain drummed against shuttered windows. The scrolls in her personal collection had grown to include works by Roman historians and philosophers whose perspectives challenged assumptions she had held since childhood. These solitary hours provided opportunities for reflection and planning that would be essential if circumstances ever allowed her to play an active role in Mediterranean politics once again. Her correspondence had expanded to include exchanges with scholars throughout the empire, intellectual relationships that transcended political boundaries, while providing her with information about developments in regions far from Rome. These letters were carefully monitored by imperial censors, but their academic character allowed discussions of historical precedents and theoretical questions that maintained her connections to the broader world of learning and culture. Dreams still carried her back to Alexandria's palace gardens and the lighthouse that had guided ships home for centuries. But these nocturnal journeys caused less anguish, as Roman realities gradually claimed larger portions of her waking thoughts. She was learning to live in the present rather than mourning an irretrievable past, finding purpose in immediate opportunities rather than dwelling on might-have-beens that served no practical function. The changing seasons marked her gradual transformation from Egyptian exile to Roman resident, each month bringing new adaptations and deeper understanding of the society that had conquered her homeland. Spring's arrival brought renewed energy and hope, while summer's heat reminded her of Alexandria's climate in ways both comforting and painful. Autumn's harvest festivals demonstrated Roman prosperity, while winter's approach marked another year of survival in circumstances she had never imagined possible. Her health had adapted to Roman climate and diet, though she maintained certain Egyptian practices that provided psychological comfort during particularly difficult periods. The foods available in Rome's markets included familiar items from throughout the Mediterranean, allowing her to recreate flavors that connected her to childhood memories and cultural identity. These small pleasures helped sustain morale during moments when the weight of exile felt unbearable. the house servants had grown accustomed to her routines and preferences, their initial curiosity about Egyptian customs giving way to comfortable familiarity that made daily life more pleasant. She learned their names and personal histories, creating relationships that provided human warmth within the constraints of her supervised existence. These connections reminded her that kindness could flourish even under circumstances that might have encouraged mutual suspicion and hostility. Her appearance had subtly changed to reflect Roman influences while maintaining essential elements of her royal heritage. She wore her hair in styles that blended Greek traditions with contemporary Roman fashion, while her jewelry combined pieces inherited from her grandmother with new acquisitions that demonstrated her growing integration into Roman social circles. The visual transformation reflected deeper changes in perspective and identity that were occurring despite her conscious efforts to preserve her original character. Language had become her most powerful tool for navigating Roman society, her fluent Latin now supplemented by understanding of regional dialects and specialized vocabularies that allowed participation in discussions previously closed to her. She spoke with growing confidence in formal settings while maintaining the accent that marked her foreign origins, using her exotic background as an asset rather than attempting to disguise her true identity. The combination of familiarity and difference made her an interesting conversationalist whose perspectives were valued precisely because they differed from typical Roman viewpoints. Her days had acquired rhythms that balanced intellectual pursuits with social obligations, physical exercise with contemplative reflection, private study with public appearances that maintained her visibility within Roman cultural life. The structure provided stability while allowing flexibility to pursue opportunities that arose through chance encounters or evolving circumstances. She had learned to live within constraints while maximizing whatever freedom remained available to her. The anniversary of her departure from Egypt approached with emotions that mixed grief for what had been lost with recognition of what had been gained through her forced adaptation to Roman life. She was no longer the teenage princess who had competed with Cleopatra for their father's throne. Having evolved into something new and unprecedented, the woman she was becoming possessed capabilities that might yet serve purposes she could not currently imagine, though she understood that any future role would necessarily differ from the traditional path she had once expected to follow. Her story continued to unfold in directions that defied prediction, shaped by forces beyond her control, but influenced by choices that remained hers to make. The skills that had prepared her for rule in Egypt were finding new applications in Roman society, while experiences impossible within traditional royal life were teaching lessons that might prove valuable in ways not yet apparent. She faced each day with curiosity about what it might bring, having learned that survival often depended on embracing change rather than resisting it. The Roman winter was beginning to give way to early spring, when news arrived that would once again transform every aspect of her carefully constructed new life. A messenger bearing Caesar's seal requested her presence for a private audience, the first direct communication she had received from the dictator since her arrival in Rome nearly a year earlier. The summons carried implications that could range from honor to disaster, though she had learned enough about Roman politics to understand that such invitations were never issued without significant purpose. Her preparations for this crucial meeting would require every skill she had developed during her months of exile, every lesson learned through careful observation of Roman customs and power structures. The teenage princess, who had lost Egypt to her sister, was about to discover whether the woman she had become through adversity possessed qualities that might interest the most powerful man in the world. The next chapter of her remarkable story was about to begin, written in chambers where the fate of empires was decided by conversations between individuals whose personal relationships shaped the destiny of millions. The summons arrived on a morning when Alexandria's harbor winds seemed to whisper through Rome's stone corridors, carrying with them the scent of distant possibilities. Arsinoe dressed with particular care, selecting garments that would honor both her Egyptian heritage and her growing understanding of Roman expectations. The deep blue silk had been a gift from Sevilla, its color reminiscent of the Mediterranean that connected her past to her present circumstances. Her hands trembled slightly as she arranged her hair in the complex braids that marked royal bloodlines, each strand woven with threads of gold that caught the early light streaming through her chamber windows. The mirror reflected a face that had matured during her months in exile, intelligence sharpened by adversity, and eyes that held depths of experience no teenage princess should have possessed. She was no longer the girl who had competed with Cleopatra for their father's throne, but something new and undefined. The journey through Rome's morning streets revealed a city awakening to another day of commerce and governance that shaped the known world. Merchants arranged their wares while senators hurried toward the forum, their togas arranged with careful attention to political symbolism. Citizens of every social station moved with purposeful energy through thoroughfares that connected the 7 hills into a unified organism of imperial power. Caesar's residence occupied an entire district near the forum, its gardens and courtyards designed to project authority while providing spaces for the private conversations that determined policy throughout the Mediterranean. Guards in bronze armor stood at attention along corridors decorated with frescoes depicting Roman victories in distant lands. The artistic celebrations of conquest created an atmosphere where negotiation occurred within clear understanding of imperial capabilities. The anteroom where she waited contained other petitioners seeking audiences with the dictator, their diverse origins reflecting the empire's vast reach. A Gallic chieftain sat beside a Syrian merchant prince, while Greek philosophers conversed quietly with Roman businessmen about opportunities emerging from political stability. Each face told stories of accommodation and adaptation that mirrored her own journey from resistance to acceptance. When her name was finally called, Arsino rose with dignity befitting her royal birth, while maintaining the deference appropriate to her current circumstances. The servant who escorted her through marble corridors spoke in whispers about protocol and expectations, though his nervous energy suggested that even palace staff understood the significance of this particular meeting. Every step brought her closer to a conversation that could reshape her understanding of what remained possible. Caesar received her in his private study, a chamber lined with scrolls and maps that revealed the intellectual foundations underlying his military conquests. The great general appeared smaller than she had expected, his presence filling the room through force of personality rather than physical stature. His greeting was cordial but measuring, the words of a man accustomed to evaluating individuals for their potential utility to imperial objectives. The conversation began with polite inquiries about her adjustment to Roman life, questions that allowed both participants to assess each other's intelligence and intentions without immediate commitment to specific positions. Caesar's reputation for penetrating analysis proved well-founded, as his seemingly casual comments revealed comprehensive knowledge of her activities, associations, and private opinions gathered through months of careful observation by his agents. She responded with equal care, demonstrating her adaptation to Roman customs while maintaining pride in her Ptolemaic heritage. The delicate balance required constant attention, as she sought to present herself as valuable without appearing threatening, intelligent without seeming arrogant, loyal without abandoning the dignity that marked legitimate royalty. Every word carried implications that extended far beyond their immediate meaning. The dictator's questions gradually focused on her knowledge of Egyptian affairs, particularly regarding economic conditions and political sentiment in regions that remained crucial to Roman interests. Her responses revealed understanding that went beyond childhood memories to encompass sophisticated analysis of agricultural systems, trade networks, and religious tensions that could influence the kingdom's stability under Cleopatra's rule. Caesar listened intently as she described the complex relationships between Greek administrative systems and Egyptian cultural traditions, dynamics that required careful management to maintain productive cooperation. Her insights demonstrated familiarity with practical governance that impressed even the experienced ruler who had administered provinces throughout Gaul. The conversation revealed depths of knowledge that transformed her from exotic curiosity into potential asset for imperial planning. The discussion eventually addressed the delicate question of her relationship with Cleopatra, a topic that required navigation through emotional minefields, while providing information useful for Roman policy formation. She spoke honestly about their childhood friendship and adult rivalry, acknowledging personal pain while maintaining objective analysis of her sister's strengths and vulnerabilities as Egypt's current ruler. Caesar's interest sharpened as she explained the factional divisions within Egyptian society that had enabled the succession crisis, identifying pressure points that could be manipulated if circumstances required Roman intervention in domestic affairs. Her analysis revealed political sophistication that went far beyond typical royal education, suggesting capabilities that might prove valuable in contexts extending beyond Egyptian boundaries. The afternoon wore on as their conversation expanded to encompass broader questions about Mediterranean politics and the challenges of governing diverse populations across vast distances. Caesar tested her understanding of Roman administrative methods, while she demonstrated knowledge of regional conditions and cultural factors that influenced imperial success in different territories. Her responses revealed a mind capable of strategic thinking that transcended personal grievances to focus on larger patterns and possibilities. She discussed the delicate balance between central authority and local autonomy that characterized successful provincial administration, drawing examples from various regions where Roman rule had achieved stability through adaptation to indigenous customs and expectations. The dictator seemed particularly intrigued by her observations about the role of women in different Mediterranean societies, a topic that allowed discussion of governance models without direct reference to her own ambitions or capabilities. She described how various cultures had accommodated female leadership when circumstances required it, providing historical precedents that could inform contemporary policy decisions. As shadows began to lengthen across the study's marble floors, Caesar finally addressed the question that had motivated their meeting. The empire faced challenges that required individuals with specialized knowledge and unquestioned loyalty to Roman interests. Her unique background and demonstrated intelligence made her suitable for missions that would serve imperial objectives while providing opportunities for personal advancement. The proposal was elegant in its complexity, offering her a path back to relevance through service to the power that had defeated her. She would travel to various eastern provinces as an unofficial representative, gathering intelligence and building relationships that could benefit Roman administration, while appearing to pursue scholarly or commercial interests that provided credible cover for her activities. The assignment would begin with a journey to Cyprus, where her royal connections and cultural knowledge could help resolve disputes between Greek and Phoenician communities that threatened the island's economic productivity. Success in this initial mission would lead to more significant responsibilities in other regions where her expertise might prove valuable. Caesar's offer represented everything she had hoped for during her months of exile, yet accepting it would require abandoning any remaining dreams of restoration to Egypt's throne. She would become a Roman agent rather than a Ptolemaic princess, her future dependent on imperial favor rather than dynastic inheritance. The choice demanded clear-eyed assessment of possibilities rather than romantic attachment to irretrievable past glory. The dictator allowed her time to consider his proposal while making clear that such opportunities rarely presented themselves twice. Her response would determine whether she remained a comfortable prisoner in Rome or embarked upon adventures that could restore purpose to her life through service to causes larger than personal ambition. Arsino requested permission to provide her answer the following morning, understanding that the decision required careful reflection about implications that extended far beyond immediate circumstances. Caesar agreed with the patience of a man accustomed to allowing others time to recognize the wisdom of accepting his suggestions. The evening journey back to her residence passed in contemplation that weighed practical considerations against emotional attachments to identity and heritage that had sustained her through the darkest moments of exile. The familiar streets of Rome, seemed different now, transformed from prison walls into pathways that might lead toward unexpected forms of freedom and purpose. Her house welcomed her return with routines that had become comforting through repetition, yet everything felt changed by the possibilities that Caesar's offer had introduced. The servants who prepared her evening meal moved through their duties while she sat in her garden, watching stars emerge above the imperial capital, where her future would be decided by dawn's arrival. The night brought little sleep as she wrestled with questions that had no perfect answers, only choices between different forms of compromise and accommodation. Her father's ring felt heavy on her finger as she considered whether accepting Roman service honored or betrayed the legacy that had shaped her understanding of duty and destiny. Dawn found her already awake, dressed in her finest garments, as she prepared to deliver a response that would determine the trajectory of whatever years remained to her. The teenage princess, who had once dreamed of ruling Egypt, was about to transform into something unprecedented in her family's history. A Ptolemy in service to Rome rather than in opposition to imperial expansion. The morning air carried scents of jasmine that reminded her of Alexandria's palace gardens, though she understood that such memories must now serve inspiration rather than lamentation for what could never be recovered. Her story was entering a new chapter that would be written in distant provinces rather than familiar corridors, among strangers who knew nothing of her birth or the dreams that had once seemed destined for fulfillment. The walk to Caesar's residence felt different from the previous day's journey, her steps lighter despite the magnitude of the decision she carried. Citizens hurried past on their morning errands while she moved toward a conversation that would reshape her understanding of service, loyalty, and the possibility of finding honor through unexpected paths. The dictator received her in the same study where their negotiations had begun, his greeting conveying confidence in her decision before she spoke the words that would bind her to Rome's service. Her acceptance was delivered with the dignity appropriate to royal surrender, acknowledging defeat while claiming victory through transformation of circumstances beyond her control. Caesar's satisfaction was evident as he outlined the practical arrangements for her new role, details that revealed extensive planning for possibilities he had clearly anticipated. Her residence would be maintained during her travels, while servants and guards would be selected for their ability to support missions requiring discretion and flexibility. The training for her initial assignment would begin immediately, conducted by experienced agents who would teach her the skills necessary for intelligence gathering and relationship building in provincial settings. She would learn codes and communication methods, negotiation techniques, and cultural customs that would enable effective operation in regions where Roman authority required subtle rather than obvious exercise. Her departure for Cyprus was scheduled within the month, allowing time for preparation while maintaining the momentum necessary for successful transition from prisoner to operative. The island's political situation required immediate attention, while its strategic location would provide opportunities to demonstrate her capabilities before more challenging assignments in other territories. The conversation concluded with formal arrangements that transformed their relationship from captor and captive to employer and agent. Though both understood that her ultimate loyalty would be tested repeatedly through circumstances that could not be predicted or controlled. Caesar's trust was conditional upon results, while her freedom depended upon success in missions that would require every skill she had developed through adversity. As she departed his residence for the final time as a mere resident of Rome, Arsinoe felt the weight of centuries lifting from her shoulders, while new responsibilities settled into their place. The gods of her ancestors had not abandoned her after all, but had prepared her through suffering for service that might yet honor their memory, while serving purposes she had never imagined possible. The afternoon brought visits from Servilia and other Roman friends who had supported her during the darkest months of exile, their congratulations mixed with concern about dangers she would face in provincial assignments. These farewell conversations revealed the depth of relationship she had built despite her captive status, connections that would provide emotional support during lonely moments in distant territories. The evening found her alone in her garden, for what might be the final time, surrounded by plants and pathways that had become familiar through seasons of forced residence. The space would be maintained during her absence, Caesar had assured her, though she understood that return to Rome would depend upon success in missions that carried significant risks, alongside their opportunities for advancement. Her packing revealed the extent to which Roman life had transformed her possessions, as well as her perspectives. Egyptian treasures now supplemented by scrolls and jewelry that reflected her growing integration into imperial culture. The synthesis mirrored her own evolution from teenage princess to mature woman, capable of serving purposes that transcended narrow dynastic interests. The final night in Rome passed in dreams that carried her forward, rather than backward. Visions of islands and harbors where ships carried goods, and messages between cultures that Roman administration was slowly weaving into a unified Mediterranean civilization. Her role in that great project remained to be defined through actions rather than intentions, service rather than birth. Dawn brought servants who would accompany her journey, men and women selected for their loyalty to Rome rather than personal attachment to her welfare. The transformation was complete as she became the leader of a small expedition rather than the protected resident of a comfortable prison, her future dependent upon her ability to succeed where failure could mean death in hostile territories. The harbour at Ostia welcomed her return with the bustle of commerce that connected Rome to every corner of its empire. Ships departing for destinations where her new career would unfold through challenges and opportunities impossible to anticipate. The vessel assigned for her transport to Cyprus flew Roman colours while carrying passengers whose diverse origins reflected the empire's cosmopolitan character. As Rome's coastline faded into morning haze, Arsinoe stood at the ship's rail, contemplating the journey that had transformed her from potential pharaoh to imperial agent, defeat into opportunity, exile into adventure. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly toward horizons where her story would continue, through chapters written in service to the power that had conquered her homeland, while offering her possibilities for honor through unexpected means. The teenage princess who had entered Caesar's presence as a captive was departing as an agent of the empire that now shaped the ancient world. Her Ptolemaic heritage transformed into an asset rather than a burden. The gods who had guided her ancestors through centuries of triumph and tragedy were preparing her for service that honored their memory, while serving purposes they had never imagined when Egyptian pharaohs ruled from Alexandria's golden throne. The ship carried her towards Cyprus and whatever destiny awaited beyond the horizon, where Roman eagles flew above ancient civilizations that were learning to find prosperity through submission rather than resistance. Her remarkable journey from palace to prison to service was entering its next phase, written in provinces where intelligence and adaptability would determine whether she survived to see whatever future lay beyond the immediate challenges of her first mission. The woman who had once competed with Cleopatra for Egypt's throne was about to discover whether the qualities that had brought her so close to victory might yet serve causes that transcended personal ambition, in service to an empire that rewarded competence regardless of birth, while demanding loyalty that superseded all other considerations. The Mediterranean welcomed her return to active life with waves that sparkled like the golden threads woven through her hair, carrying her toward adventures that would test every lesson learned through adversity, while offering opportunities to create new forms of honor from the ashes of ancient dreams. The Cyprus assignment would prove more complex than Caesar's briefing had suggested, as Arsinoe discovered within hours of her arrival at the island's bustling port of Salamis. The harbor teemed with merchants speaking a dozen different languages, their voices rising above the creak of ship timbers and the splash of oars as vessels maneuvered between crowded berths. The air carried scents of cedar, frankincense, and the distinctive copper dust that marked Cyprus as Rome's primary source of the metal that gave the island its name. Her lodgings had been arranged in a villa overlooking the eastern harbour, its terraced gardens providing privacy while offering clear views of maritime traffic that formed the lifeblood of the island's economy. The residence belonged to a Roman businessman whose copper mining interests required discretion about certain transactions that skirted imperial regulations. His cooperation had been secured through methods that Arsino preferred not to examine too closely, though she understood that her mission's success depended upon such practical arrangements. The morning after her arrival brought visitors whose careful dress and measured speech identified them as representatives of Cyprus's competing factions. The Greek community, descended from colonists who had arrived centuries before Roman conquest, controlled much of the island's traditional agriculture and maintained cultural connections to the eastern Mediterranean. The Phoenicians, whose ancestors had established trading posts along the coast, dominated maritime commerce, while preserving religious practices that sometimes conflicted with Roman sensibilities. The dispute that had prompted her assignment involved competing claims to copper deposits in the island's mountainous interior, where recent discoveries promised enormous wealth for whichever group could establish legal ownership. Greek families claimed ancestral rights dating to the island's original settlement, while Phoenician merchants argued that their commercial investments gave them superior claims to mineral exploitation. Roman law offered precedents supporting both positions, creating uncertainty that threatened to escalate into violence. Arsino's first meetings revealed the complexity underlying what had initially appeared to be a straightforward property dispute. The Greek delegation was led by Nicomedes, an elderly philosopher whose family had governed parts of the island before Roman annexation. His arguments drew upon classical legal principles and historical precedents, presented with the scholarly precision that characterized Hellenistic intellectual traditions. Yet beneath his academic approach lay emotional attachments to land that his ancestors had cultivated for generations. The Phoenician representative proved equally formidable in different ways. Abdelkart was a successful merchant whose trading network extended from Cyprus to Spain, his ships carrying everything from purple dye to African ivory through ports that acknowledged Roman authority while maintaining their own commercial customs. His case rested upon practical considerations about investment, development, and the economic benefits that efficient exploitation could provide for the island's overall prosperity. Both men possessed intelligence and determination that made simple solutions impossible, while their followers included individuals whose commitment to their respective causes bordered on fanaticism. The Greek community viewed the dispute as essential for preserving their cultural identity in an increasingly Roman world, while Phoenician merchants saw mineral rights as crucial for maintaining commercial advantages that competition from other provinces threatened to erode. The Roman governor, Quintus Servilius, had requested imperial intervention because his own efforts at mediation had failed to produce acceptable compromises. A career administrator whose experience included service in Gaul and Spain, he understood the dangers of allowing local conflicts to escalate into broader challenges to Roman authority. Yet his military background provided limited preparation for disputes that required cultural sensitivity as much as legal expertise. Arsino's approach drew upon lessons learned during her months in Rome, where she had observed how successful administrators balanced competing interests while maintaining imperial objectives. She began by establishing separate relationships with each faction's leaders, demonstrating respect for their positions while avoiding premature commitment to specific solutions. The strategy required patient cultivation of trust among individuals who viewed compromise as potential betrayal of their community's fundamental interests. Her first breakthrough came through recognition that both sides shared concerns about external threats to Cyprus's autonomy that superseded their immediate disagreements. Pirates from Cilicia had been raiding coastal settlements with increasing boldness, while Egyptian merchants were offering preferential trading arrangements that could undermine the island's traditional independence. These common challenges provided foundation for cooperation that transcended the mineral rights dispute. The negotiations that followed required weeks of careful maneuvering as Arsino worked to transform antagonists into reluctant partners. She proposed joint development of the disputed copper deposits under Roman supervision, with profits shared according to formulas that recognize both Greek ancestral claims and Phoenician investment contributions. The arrangement satisfied neither side completely, but offered benefits that outweighed their respective sacrifices. More importantly, the agreement established mechanisms for addressing future disputes through arbitration rather than confrontation, creating institutional frameworks that would serve Roman interests while respecting local customs. The success demonstrated capabilities that exceeded Caesar's expectations, earning her commendation that opened doors to more significant assignments in other troubled provinces. Her Cyprus mission concluded with ceremonies that celebrated successful resolution while reinforcing Roman authority over the island's affairs. Both Greek and Phoenician leaders participated in rituals that honored their ancestral traditions while acknowledging imperial oversight of their agreement. The synthesis reflected the broader patterns of accommodation that characterized successful Roman administration throughout the Mediterranean world. The evening before her departure brought private meetings with individuals who had supported her efforts, conversations that revealed the personal costs of diplomatic success. Nicomedes spoke wistfully about cultural changes that were gradually transforming Greek communities throughout the eastern provinces, while Abd Melkart expressed concerns about maintaining Phoenician commercial independence in an increasingly regulated imperial economy. Their fears reflected broader tensions between local identity and imperial unity that would challenge administrators throughout the empire. Her return voyage to Rome carried reports that documented not only the immediate success of her mission, but also insights into regional conditions that could inform future policy decisions. The dispatches revealed her growing understanding of how Roman power operated most effectively through cooperation rather than coercion, achieving stability through institutions that served imperial interests while accommodating local preferences. Caesar received her debriefing with satisfaction that opened discussions about more challenging assignments in provinces where Roman authority faced more serious threats. The success in Cyprus had demonstrated her ability to navigate complex cultural negotiations while maintaining focus on imperial objectives, capabilities that would prove valuable in regions where diplomacy required even greater sophistication. The months that followed brought assignments that tested her skills in increasingly difficult circumstances. A mission to Crete required mediation between Roman colonists and indigenous populations, whose traditional lands had been redistributed to veterans of Caesar's campaigns. The situation demanded delicate balance between honoring promises made to loyal soldiers while preventing rebellions that could destabilize a strategically crucial island. Her approach emphasized economic development that created opportunities for cooperation between competing groups, establishing joint ventures in agriculture and fishing that provided mutual benefits while strengthening Roman control. The success earned recognition from military commanders who had previously viewed diplomatic solutions with skepticism, demonstrating that negotiation could achieve results that force alone could not guarantee. A subsequent assignment in Rhodes proved even more challenging, as the island's traditional role as an independent trading center conflicted with Roman desires for greater regulatory control over Mediterranean commerce. The negotiations required understanding of complex financial arrangements that connected Rhodes to trading networks throughout the eastern provinces, while addressing Roman concerns about tax collection and customs enforcement. The resolution involved gradual integration of Rhodian commercial practices into imperial regulatory frameworks, preserving the island's trading advantages while ensuring Roman revenue requirements were met. The agreement served as a model for similar arrangements in other commercial centers where imperial control needed to accommodate local economic interests. Each successful mission strengthened her reputation within Roman administrative circles, while providing education in governance challenges that extended far beyond her original Egyptian expertise. She learned to operate effectively in cultural environments that ranged from Celtic settlements in southern Gaul to Berber communities in North Africa, adapting her approach to local conditions while maintaining focus on imperial objectives. The assignments also revealed the personal costs of her new career. as years of travel and negotiation left little opportunity for the stable relationships that might have provided emotional sustenance during difficult periods. Her connections remained primarily professional rather than personal, friendships limited by the demands of missions that required constant attention to security and discretion. Yet she found satisfaction in achievements that served purposes larger than personal advancement, contributing to the stability and prosperity of regions where successful administration improved life for millions of inhabitants. The teenage princess who had once dreamed of ruling Egypt had discovered forms of influence that transcended traditional concepts of royal power, serving causes that honored her intelligence while providing opportunities for genuine accomplishment. The Roman winter of 44 BCE brought news that would once again reshape every aspect of her carefully constructed career. Caesar's assassination on the Ides of March created power vacuum that threatened to plunge the empire into civil war, while her status as his personal agent made her vulnerable to suspicion from whatever faction might emerge victorious from the coming struggle. The immediate aftermath of the dictator's death found her in Alexandria, where a diplomatic mission had brought her back to Egypt for the first time since her exile 7 years earlier. The city of her birth seemed both familiar and alien, its monuments unchanged, while its political atmosphere reflected the uncertainty that gripped the entire Mediterranean world. Cleopatra's position as Caesar's former ally made her equally vulnerable to the shifting loyalties that would determine the empire's future direction. The sisters' reunion occurred in the same palace chambers where their childhood rivalry had first emerged, though both women had been transformed by experiences that made their original competition seem like innocent games. Cleopatra retained her throne, but faced challenges from Roman factions that viewed her relationship with Caesar as grounds for suspicion, while Arsinoe possessed skills and knowledge that might prove valuable if carefully applied to the changing circumstances. Their conversation revealed the extent to which both sisters had adapted to Roman realities while maintaining their Ptolemaic heritage, finding ways to serve imperial interests while preserving essential elements of their cultural identity. The discussion opened possibilities for cooperation that had been impossible during their earlier rivalry, though both understood that any alliance would require careful navigation of dangers that surrounded anyone associated with Caesar's legacy. The months that followed would test every lesson Arsinoe had learned through her years of exile and service, as the Roman Republic collapsed into civil war, while she worked to survive in an environment where yesterday's allies could become tomorrow's enemies. Her remarkable journey from princess to prisoner to agent was entering another phase of transformation, one that would determine whether her hard-won expertise could serve her own interests as effectively as it had served Rome's imperial ambitions. The teenage girl who had once competed with Cleopatra for their father's throne had become a woman whose understanding of power transcended dynastic inheritance to encompass the complex realities of Mediterranean politics in an age of revolutionary change. The gods who had guided her through defeat and exile were preparing her for challenges that would test not only her survival skills, but her ability to help shape whatever new order emerged from the chaos that Caesar's death had unleashed upon the ancient world. Her story continued to unfold through chapters written in the shadow of civil war, where intelligence and adaptability would prove more valuable than birth or traditional authority. The woman who had learned to serve Rome's interests was about to discover whether those same skills could help her navigate the treacherous currents of a collapsing republic, while protecting the sister whose rivalry had once threatened to destroy them both. The palace corridors that witnessed their reunion echoed with memories of childhood games and adolescent dreams. But the women who walked those marble floors carried responsibilities that their younger selves could never have imagined. The future remained unwritten, shaped by forces beyond their control, yet influenced by choices that remained theirs to make in service to causes that honored their heritage while acknowledging the realities of a world transformed by Roman conquest and civil strife. The Mediterranean that had carried Arsinoe into exile and back again stretched toward horizons where new adventures awaited, challenges that would test every lesson learned through years of adversity, while offering opportunities to create legacies worthy of the Ptolemaic name. The lighthouse of Alexandria continued to guide ships safely home, its beacon a symbol of continuity that connected past achievements to future possibilities for those brave enough to seize them despite the dangers that lurked in the gathering darkness of a republic's final hours. The spring of 43 BCE found Arsinoe navigating the treacherous waters of a Mediterranean world torn apart by competing ambitions. Mark Antony's forces controlled the eastern provinces, while Octavian consolidated power in Rome, each claiming to represent Caesar's true legacy, while pursuing agendas that served their personal interests above imperial stability. Egypt's position between these rival powers made every decision potentially fatal, while Cleopatra's pregnancy with Caesar's son added new complexities to already dangerous political calculations. The sisters established a routine of morning consultations in the palace's eastern wing, where windows overlooked the harbour that connected Alexandria to the wider world. These sessions began before dawn, with intelligence reports from agents scattered throughout the Mediterranean, their coded messages revealing the shifting alliances and military movements that would determine the empire's future. Arsinoe had maintained her network of contacts despite Caesar's death, relationships that now provided crucial information about developments in distant provinces. The reports painted a picture of accelerating chaos as regional commanders chose sides based on calculations that prioritized immediate survival over long-term stability. Gaul remained loyal to Antony through commanders who remembered his service under Caesar, while Spain showed signs of supporting Octavian's claims to legitimacy. The eastern provinces wavered between competing loyalties, their decisions influenced by promises that both factions might lack the power to fulfill. Cleopatra's position had grown increasingly precarious as her association with Caesar transformed from asset to liability in the new political environment. Roman senators, who had tolerated her influence during the dictator's lifetime, now viewed her as a foreign threat to republican traditions, while her wealth and intelligence made her valuable to whichever faction could secure her support. The challenge lay in choosing correctly among alternatives that offered equal measures of opportunity and danger. Their breakfast conversations revealed how much both sisters had changed since their childhood rivalry had first divided their father's court. Cleopatra retained her gift for languages and cultural synthesis, speaking fluently with Egyptian priests in the morning and Roman diplomats in the afternoon. Her ability to embody different identities serving her well in negotiations that required understanding of diverse perspectives. Yet the responsibilities of rule had added gravity to her manner, the weight of millions of subjects tempering the impulsiveness that had once characterized her approach to political challenges. Arsinoe brought different but equally valuable capabilities to their collaboration. Her years of exile and service having taught her to read the subtle currents of Roman politics with precision that impressed even her experienced sister. She understood how provincial administrators thought and acted, knowledge that proved essential for predicting which regions might support different factions as the civil war developed. Her insights helped shape Egyptian policy toward developments that could determine whether their kingdom maintained its independence or became another Roman province. The palace became a center of diplomatic activity, as representatives from throughout the Mediterranean sought audiences with the sisters, their missions ranging from formal negotiations to covert intelligence gathering. Each visitor brought information about conditions in their home territories, while seeking Egyptian support for their various causes. The conversations required careful management to extract useful intelligence while avoiding commitments that could prove dangerous if circumstances changed. Morning audiences were followed by administrative sessions, where the practical business of governing Egypt continued despite the external turmoil. The kingdom's agricultural cycles demanded attention regardless of Roman politics, while tax collection and infrastructure maintenance required decisions that would affect millions of lives. Arsinoe's experience with provincial administration proved valuable for understanding how policies developed in Alexandria would be implemented in distant regions where local officials possessed considerable autonomy. The Nile's annual flood cycle provided structure to their planning, as the sisters worked to ensure that Egypt's legendary prosperity would survive whatever political changes might emerge from the Roman civil war. Granaries needed to be filled and trade routes protected, while diplomatic relationships required cultivation, with powers that might prove decisive in determining their kingdom's fate. The careful balance between domestic needs and international obligations demanded constant attention from rulers who understood that survival depended upon excellence in both areas. Afternoon hours were devoted to cultural and religious observances that maintained Egyptian traditions while accommodating Roman expectations about provincial behavior. Cleopatra's public appearances required elaborate choreography that presented her as both pharaoh and ally, her costume and ceremonies blending ancient symbolism with contemporary political messages. These performances served multiple audiences simultaneously, reassuring Egyptian subjects while demonstrating loyalty to whichever Roman faction seemed most likely to emerge victorious. The religious dimensions of their rule demanded particular sensitivity, as priests throughout the kingdom watched for signs about which foreign power would ultimately control Egypt's destiny. Traditional ceremonies honoring Isis and Ptah continued according to ancient protocols, while new rituals acknowledged Roman gods whose favor might prove essential for maintaining independence. The synthesis required theological sophistication that honored both traditions without appearing to compromise either set of divine relationships. Evening brought private discussions where the sisters could speak freely about their fears and hopes for Egypt's future, conversations that revealed the emotional costs of leadership during such uncertain times. Both women understood that their decisions would determine not only their personal fates, but the welfare of subjects who depended upon royal wisdom for protection against forces beyond their control. The weight of responsibility was particularly heavy for rulers who remembered their kingdom's glory during more stable periods. Their father's library provided refuge during especially difficult evenings, its scrolls containing wisdom from centuries of Ptolemaic rule that offered guidance for contemporary challenges. The recorded experiences of previous dynasties revealed patterns of adaptation and survival that might inform current policy decisions, while philosophical texts provided frameworks for understanding the moral dimensions of choices that affected millions of lives. The sisters often read together late into the night, seeking precedents and principles that could guide their responses to unprecedented circumstances. The palace gardens offered another form of solace as the women walked among plants and fountains that had provided beauty for generations of royal inhabitants. The carefully tended spaces represented continuity with Egypt's ancient past, while serving as venues for informal conversations with advisors who preferred privacy for their most sensitive communications. These outdoor meetings allowed discussions of topics too dangerous for indoor chambers, where servants and guards might overhear confidential deliberations. Security concerns required constant vigilance as the sisters balanced accessibility to subjects and allies against protection from assassins, who might serve competing factions in the Roman civil war. Their daily routines incorporated precautions that had been unnecessary during more peaceful periods, while trusted servants underwent additional screening to ensure their loyalty remained undivided. The measures were essential but intrusive, transforming familiar spaces into carefully monitored environments where spontaneous interactions became rare. The harbour remained central to their intelligence operations, as ships arrived daily with news, goods, and passengers, whose true purposes often differed from their declared intentions. Both sisters spent time observing maritime traffic from palace windows that provided clear views of vessels entering and leaving Alexandria's famous port. The ships' origins and destinations revealed patterns of trade and communication that reflected political developments throughout the Mediterranean world. Naval security became increasingly important as the civil war intensified, and control of sea routes determined which factions could move troops and supplies effectively. Egypt's traditional naval strength provided advantages that both Antony and Octavian sought to claim. while the sisters worked to maintain independence that served their kingdom's interests rather than Roman ambitions. The careful diplomacy required to navigate these competing demands tested their political skills to their limits. The autumn of 43 BCE brought news that would reshape their strategic calculations as the second triumvirate formed between Antony, Octavian, and Lepidus. The alliance created new stability in Roman politics while establishing a framework for dividing the Mediterranean world among the three leaders. Egypt's position became more clearly defined as Antony assumed responsibility for eastern provinces, though his ultimate intentions regarding their kingdom's independence remained unclear. Cleopatra's decision to align with Antony reflected careful analysis of alternatives that offered no perfect solutions, but required choices that would determine their survival. The relationship that developed combined personal attraction with political necessity, creating bonds that served both parties' interests while generating new vulnerabilities that their enemies might exploit. The sisters understood that this alliance represented their best hope for maintaining Egyptian independence, though it required careful management to prevent becoming mere clients of Roman power. The winter months brought intensive preparations for meetings with Antony that would determine Egypt's role in the emerging Mediterranean order. Every detail of costume, ceremony, and conversation required planning that reflected both royal dignity and political subordination, a delicate balance that challenged traditional concepts of pharaonic authority. The sisters worked together to create presentations that would impress their Roman ally while preserving essential elements of their cultural identity. Their preparations revealed how completely the Mediterranean world had changed since their father's death, when Egyptian wealth and Roman power had seemed more evenly balanced. The civil wars had demonstrated Roman military superiority while revealing Egypt's dependence upon foreign protection for maintaining independence. The sisters adapted to these new realities while seeking opportunities to preserve their kingdom's prosperity and cultural traditions within whatever framework emerged from the ongoing conflicts. The famous meeting at Tarsus, where Cleopatra presented herself to Antony with theatrical magnificence that captured his imagination and secured his support, represented the culmination of months of careful preparation. The spectacle that impressed Roman observers drew upon centuries of Ptolemaic ceremonial traditions while incorporating elements designed to appeal to contemporary tastes and political sensibilities. The success of this diplomatic theatre demonstrated how traditional royal prerogatives could be adapted to serve contemporary political necessities. Arsinoe's role in these preparations reflected her transformation from rival to advisor, her expertise in Roman culture proving essential for understanding how their presentations would be received by audiences whose approval determined Egypt's fate. The collaboration between sisters who had once competed for their father's throne now served purposes that transcended personal ambition to encompass their kingdom's survival in a dramatically changed world. The agreements that emerged from these negotiations established Egypt's position within Antony's sphere of influence while preserving significant autonomy in domestic affairs. The arrangements satisfied neither complete independence nor total submission, creating a hybrid status that reflected the complex realities of power relationships in the late Republican period. Both sisters understood that their success would depend upon careful management of obligations that served Roman interests while protecting Egyptian priorities. The months that followed brought new challenges as they worked to implement policies that honored their commitments to Antony, while maintaining popular support among Egyptian subjects who valued traditional royal prerogatives. The balance required constant adjustment as circumstances changed and new pressures emerged from various sources within and beyond their kingdom's borders. Their collaboration proved essential for managing complexities that would have overwhelmed any individual ruler. The spring of 42 BCE found them establishing routines that incorporated Roman expectations into Egyptian governmental structures, creating administrative hybrid that served both sets of requirements while maintaining operational efficiency. Morning meetings now included Roman advisors whose presence ensured compliance with Antony's policies, while afternoon sessions focused on domestic concerns that remained primarily Egyptian in character. The synthesis required diplomatic skills that both sisters had developed through years of navigating cross-cultural challenges. Their success in managing these competing demands demonstrated how intelligent adaptation could preserve essential elements of traditional authority within dramatically changed circumstances. The teenage rivals who had once threatened to destroy their dynasty through civil war had evolved into collaborative leaders whose partnership served their kingdom's interests more effectively than either could have achieved alone. Their story illustrated how adversity could transform destructive competition into productive cooperation when survival required abandoning personal grievances in favor of shared objectives. The palace that had once witnessed their rivalry now served as headquarters for joint efforts that honored their father's memory while serving contemporary necessities. The chambers, where they had competed as children, became venues for discussions that shaped policies affecting millions of subjects whose welfare depended upon royal wisdom and diplomatic skill. The transformation reflected broader changes in Mediterranean politics that required new approaches to governance and international relations. Their evening conversations often returned to questions about legacy and the responsibilities that came with inheriting such ancient and distinguished traditions. Both women understood that their reigns would be judged not only by immediate successes, but by their ability to preserve essential elements of Egyptian civilization for future generations. The weight of such obligations influenced every decision as they worked to balance competing demands, while maintaining cultural continuity that connected their rule to 3 centuries of Ptolemaic achievement. The lighthouse of Alexandria continued to guide ships safely home through storms that threatened to overwhelm smaller vessels, its beacons serving as metaphor for royal leadership that provided stability during turbulent periods. The sisters, who had once competed for control of that symbol, now shared responsibility for maintaining its light through whatever darkness might emerge from the continuing struggles that would determine their kingdom's ultimate fate. Their collaboration represented hope that intelligence and determination could preserve civilization's achievements, even when circumstances seemed to favor chaos over order. The Mediterranean world that had witnessed their rivalry and reconciliation continued to evolve through patterns of conflict and accommodation that would reshape ancient civilization for centuries to come. The sisters who had learned to navigate these treacherous currents together faced an uncertain future with confidence born from shared experience of surviving challenges that had seemed impossible to overcome. Their remarkable journey from competition to collaboration demonstrated how the greatest achievements often emerged from the most unlikely partnerships, forged through adversity that tested every aspect of character and capability. The story of Arsinoe and Cleopatra's transformation from rivals to allies reflected broader themes about adaptation, survival, and the complex relationships between personal ambition and public service that characterized leadership during periods of revolutionary change. Their success in preserving Egyptian independence while accommodating Roman power illustrated how intelligent compromise could achieve results that neither complete submission nor total resistance could have accomplished. The teenage princesses, who had once threatened to destroy their dynasty through civil war, had become women whose partnership served as model for collaborative leadership that honored tradition while embracing necessary change. The chambers where they now worked together echoed with memories of childhood games and adolescent dreams, but the women who occupied those spaces carried responsibilities that their younger selves could never have imagined. The future remained unwritten, shaped by forces beyond their control, yet influenced by choices that remained theirs to make, in service to causes that honored their heritage while acknowledging the realities of a world transformed by conquest and civil strife. The Mediterranean that had witnessed their journey from rivalry to reconciliation stretched toward horizons where new adventures awaited, challenges that would test every lesson learned through years of adversity, while offering opportunities to create legacies worthy of the Ptolemaic name. Their remarkable story continued to unfold through chapters written in the shadow of civil war, where intelligence and adaptability proved more valuable than birth or traditional authority. The Lighthouse of Alexandria maintained its vigil over waters that connected past achievements to future possibilities. Its light a symbol of continuity that guided travelers safely home regardless of the storms that might rage beyond the harbor's protection. The sisters who had learned to share responsibility for that beacon faced whatever challenges lay ahead with confidence born from experience of surviving together what neither could have overcome alone. Alone. The bonds forged between the sisters through necessity would face their ultimate test as the tides of Roman civil war reached their shores with unprecedented force. The summer of 41 BCE brought visitors whose presence transformed the palace corridors into stages where the fate of empires would be decided through conversations that balanced diplomacy with desire, politics with passion. Mark Antony's arrival in Alexandria exceeded even Cleopatra's carefully orchestrated expectations, his retinue filling the harbor with ships that displayed Roman power while seeking Egyptian wealth. The general who had commanded Caesar's cavalry now possessed authority over half the Mediterranean world. Yet his fascination with Egypt's queen revealed vulnerabilities that astute observers might exploit. Orsino watched these developments with the analytical eye of someone who had learned to read Roman psychology through years of careful study. The negotiations that followed required both sisters to navigate complexities that transcended traditional diplomatic protocols. Antony's demands for Egyptian support in his campaigns against Parthia needed to be balanced against the kingdom's capacity to provide resources without compromising domestic stability. The discussions unfolded in chambers where pharaohs had received foreign ambassadors for centuries, yet the stakes had never been higher for preserving the independence that made such meetings possible. Cleopatra's relationship with Antony deepened beyond political calculation into personal attachment that created new possibilities and dangers for Egypt's future. Their evening conversations in the palace gardens revealed a man whose ambitions matched his military capabilities, yet whose understanding of Eastern cultures remained superficial despite his administrative experience. The Queen's ability to educate him about regional complexities while maintaining his romantic interest required performances that showcased her intelligence alongside her legendary charm. Orsino's role during these crucial months evolved into that of trusted advisor, whose insights helped shape policies that served Egyptian interests while satisfying Roman expectations. Her experience with provincial administration proved invaluable for understanding how agreements negotiated in Alexandria would be implemented across territories where local conditions might complicate theoretical arrangements. The practical knowledge she had gained through years of exile now served her homeland's diplomatic needs. The palace routines adapted to accommodate Roman presence while maintaining Egyptian ceremonial traditions that reinforced cultural identity. Morning meetings included discussions of military logistics and campaign planning, subjects that required careful attention to resource allocation and supply chain management. Orsino's contributions to these sessions demonstrated expertise that impressed even experienced Roman officers who had initially questioned her qualifications for participation in strategic planning. Afternoon audiences featured petitioners from throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, local rulers, and merchant princes whose support would prove essential for any military campaigns that crossed their territories. These conversations required linguistic skills and cultural knowledge that few Romans possessed, making the sisters invaluable intermediaries whose translations often carried subtle diplomatic messages that served multiple purposes simultaneously. The administrative burden of supporting Roman military preparations fell heavily upon Egyptian governmental systems that had been designed for different purposes. Tax collection needed to be accelerated without triggering popular unrest, while agricultural surpluses had to be diverted from domestic consumption to supply armies whose appetites seemed unlimited. The sisters worked closely with provincial governors to ensure that these demands were met efficiently while maintaining the social stability that made such cooperation possible. Religious observances took on new significance as Egyptian priests sought divine guidance about their kingdom's involvement in foreign wars. The ancient rituals honoring Isis and Ptah were supplemented by ceremonies acknowledging Roman deities whose favor might influence military outcomes. These theological accommodations required careful management to avoid offending traditional believers, while demonstrating proper respect for supernatural forces that both cultures recognized as powerful. The harbor became a constant source of activity as ships arrived with supplies and departed with Egyptian goods destined for Roman armies gathering in distant provinces. The logistics of coordinating these movements required administrative skills that drew upon both sisters' expertise. Cleopatra's knowledge of domestic resources, complementing Arsinoe's understanding of international transportation networks. Their collaboration ensured that Egypt's contributions reached their destinations efficiently, while generating profits that offset the costs of supporting foreign military adventures. Evening entertainments provided opportunities for informal diplomacy that often proved more productive than formal negotiations. Roman officers and Egyptian officials mingled in settings that encouraged personal relationships while allowing exchange of information that might not emerge through official channels. These social gatherings required careful orchestration to ensure that conversations served Egyptian interests while maintaining the convivial atmosphere that Romans expected from their Eastern allies. The palace libraries became centers of strategic planning as military maps and campaign histories provided context for discussions about Parthian geography and tactical challenges. Both sisters spent hours studying accounts of previous Roman expeditions into Mesopotamia, analyzing successes and failures that might inform contemporary planning. Their research revealed patterns of logistical difficulties and cultural misunderstandings that could be addressed through Egyptian expertise if properly applied. Personal correspondence with contacts throughout the Mediterranean world provided intelligence about political developments that might affect the Eastern campaigns. Letters arrived regularly from Cyprus, Rhodes, and other provinces where Arsinoe had served, their coded messages revealing local conditions and sentiment that could influence military operations. This network of informants proved invaluable for understanding regional dynamics that formal diplomatic channels might not reveal. The approaching winter brought intensified preparations as final arrangements were made for campaigns that would determine whether Roman power could extend successfully into territories that had resisted previous invasions. Egyptian contributions to these efforts included not only material support, but also cultural expertise that might prove decisive for achieving diplomatic objectives that military force alone could not accomplish. The sisters understood that their kingdom's future independence might depend upon the success of ventures in which they were now deeply invested. Training programs were established to prepare Egyptian advisors who would accompany Roman forces into unfamiliar territories where local customs and languages could determine the difference between success and failure. These educational initiatives drew upon both sisters' knowledge of cross-cultural communication, their experiences with diverse populations, providing models for interaction that might prevent misunderstandings that had doomed previous expeditions. The palace workshops produced gifts and ceremonial objects that would be essential for diplomatic negotiations with Parthian nobles, whose cooperation could facilitate Roman objectives. These items required careful attention to cultural symbolism and artistic traditions that conveyed appropriate messages about Egyptian sophistication while honoring regional preferences. The sisters supervised these productions personally, understanding that such details might influence outcomes of crucial negotiations. As winter deepened, the intensity of preparations created an atmosphere of barely controlled excitement throughout Alexandria. Citizens understood that their kingdom was participating in historical enterprises that could reshape the balance of power throughout the ancient world. Success might elevate Egypt to unprecedented heights of influence, while failure could result in absorption into Roman provincial administration that would end 3 centuries of Ptolemaic independence. The sisters' evening conversations during this period revealed their awareness that they were living through events that would be remembered for generations. Their decisions were shaping not only immediate military outcomes, but also the cultural and political legacy that their dynasty would leave for future historians to evaluate. The weight of such responsibilities influenced every choice as they worked to balance competing demands while preserving essential elements of Egyptian civilization. Religious ceremonies marking the winter solstice carried special significance as priests sought omens about the coming campaigns and their implications for the kingdom's future. The traditional rituals honoring the sun god's annual rebirth were supplemented by prayers for military success and divine protection for Egyptian interests in distant lands. These observances provided spiritual comfort while reinforcing cultural identity during periods of unprecedented change. The new year brought final preparations as Roman forces began assembling for spring campaigns that would test every aspect of the alliance between Egypt and Antony's faction. Supply trains departed regularly for staging areas where armies would gather before marching into territories that had never acknowledged Roman authority. The logistics of coordinating these movements required constant attention from administrators who understood that failure in supporting roles could doom even the most brilliant military strategies. Intelligence reports from eastern provinces revealed the challenges that awaited Roman forces in lands where geography, climate, and cultural hostility combined to create obstacles that had defeated previous invaders. The sisters used this information to advise their Roman allies about potential difficulties while preparing contingency plans that might preserve Egyptian interests regardless of campaign outcomes. The palace corridors that had once echoed with childhood laughter now resonated with discussions of strategy and diplomacy that would determine whether the teenage rivals had successfully transformed their competition into collaboration that served their kingdom's greatest needs. Their remarkable journey from antagonists to partners was approaching its most crucial test as the ancient world prepared for conflicts that would reshape civilization itself. The lighthouse of Alexandria continued its eternal vigil, its beacon guiding ships toward harbors where the future of empires would be decided through courage, wisdom, and the unpredictable fortunes of war. The Mediterranean stretched toward horizons where Roman eagles would soon clash with Parthian cavalry in battles that would echo through history, while the sisters who had learned to share power prepared for whatever outcomes might emerge from ventures that could elevate their dynasty to unprecedented heights or consign it to the dustbin of conquered kingdoms. Their story continued to unfold through choices that honored their ancestors while serving contemporary necessities. Each decision weighted with implications that extended far beyond personal ambition to encompass the welfare of millions who depended upon royal wisdom for guidance through uncertain times. The spring campaigns would test every lesson they had learned through years of rivalry and reconciliation, their collaboration serving as foundation for policies that might yet preserve Egyptian independence within whatever new order emerged from the chaos of civil war and foreign conquest. The teenage princesses who had once threatened to destroy their heritage through competition had become women whose partnership represented hope that intelligence and determination could triumph over forces that seemed to favor chaos over civilization, destruction over preservation, conquest over cultural continuity. Continuity. As the seasons turned and empires rose and fell around them, the story of these remarkable sisters draws to its gentle close. Tonight, we've journeyed through palaces where whispered conspiracies shaped the ancient world, walked corridors where teenage rivals transformed into collaborative rulers who preserved their dynasty through wisdom rather than warfare. From Arsinoe's dawn preparations in silk-draped chambers to their evening consultations beneath painted ceilings where gods danced in eternal procession, we've witnessed how intelligence and adaptability could triumph over seemingly impossible circumstances. The lighthouse of Alexandria continued its eternal watch long after these women passed into legend. Its beacon, a fitting symbol for lives that guided others through treacherous waters. Their transformation from deadly competitors to trusted partners demonstrated that even the most bitter rivalries could evolve into something greater when survival demanded setting aside personal grievances for shared purposes. In chambers where they once plotted against each other, they learned to plot together for their kingdom's future, their morning rituals of grooming and governance becoming acts of preservation rather than preparation for battle. Tonight, as you drift towards sleep, remember these sisters who discovered that true power lay not in crushing one's rivals, but in recognizing when former enemies might become invaluable allies. Their daily routines of diplomacy and administration, from breakfast conversations about Roman politics to evening walks through jasmine-scented gardens, created a legacy that outlasted the empires that sought to contain them. In the end, it was not the strength of their armies, but the wisdom of their collaboration that allowed the blood of Alexander's general to flow through pharaonic veins for just a little longer, in an ancient world that seemed determined to forget such extraordinary women existed at all.